So this is the third video in this latest group to address and consider in some detail what Genette is conveying about the role of the narrator. So I realise it's by no means fast and furious, but anyway, let's press on to the end. There are going to be three more questions and some things I want to just mention before we get to them. So the questions will be coming up a little bit later. But you'll notice throughout this chapter that Genette tends to return pretty much routinely or regularly to a novel by Marcel Proust, a French writer from the beginning of the 20th century. That's In Remembrance of Things Past, sort of à la recherche de temps perdu. And Genette's fascinated with the multiple structures that Proust creates. But there are two terms that will be useful to us because they are musically suggestive, and they certainly also apply to film. So those are again Greek terms. He talks about analepsis, so the Greek word analepsis, which we can translate as flashback. There is also prolepsis. Prolepsis, again a Greek word, means flash forwards. So again, if we could wind all the way back to question one, that particular composer is clearly thinking analeptically, thinking back in time. So the two words here we're going to just make sure that we have a mind for are analepsis, flashback, prolepsis, flash forwards. But at that point, Genette's ready to move on to his final section, and this is going to be dealing with personhood or agency. So we're now at page 243. Referring to the narrating agent, he sees it as important to distinguish between narrators who are present in the stories they tell. He says these we can refer to as a category called homodiegetic narrators, for instance, Dr. Watson in the case of Sherlock Holmes tales, and those narrators who are absent from the stories they tell. That is, those narrators who he would regard as being heterodiegetic. So homodiegetic, the category there refers to narrators who are present in the story. Heterodiegetic means those who are absent from the story they tell. And the illustration he gives is a very ancient and venerable one. That's Homer, who in relating the Iliad is narrating it but does not appear in it. On page 248, he then draws up a nice little two-dimensional model, a little diagram, whereby he's thinking in terms of both presence and absence, and primary level narratives and secondary level narratives. So the diagram there is worth taking a look at. So presence and absence, narrators that are there in the story and those that are not, whether they are there at the primary level or at a secondary level. Now I'm going to ask question 7, which moves on again, but I thought it was important just to address these issues because they can be musically live. But question 7 really deals with a question that no one could quite answer satisfactorily in the first group. So, which literary form or genre entails a distinction between the narrating I, that is the first person pronoun, and the narrated I? So which genre is this? Literary form genre entails a distinction, says Genette, between the narrating I, that is the person who narrates, and the person who says I within the text, the narrated I. Question 8. Genette identifies 4 functions. He identifies 5 functions of the narrator, which he terms aspects. So 5 functions of the narrator, which he terms aspects. Please name these. So name these as the answer to question 8. So 5 functions of the narrator, which he terms aspects. Finally, question 9. What is the name he gives to the recipient of a story? If the narrator narrates, who receives the story? To add to that, I will say this. So this is not directly relevant to the answer. The answer should be just one word. But what I like about what he says next is this, that a narrator who is extradiegetic, i.e. is clearly narrating, and who is heterodiegetic, that is a narrator not part of the story. seems to speak to no one in particular. In that case, there is simply perhaps in the tale, if it is literary, an implied reader, someone who is not named, who is then actualized when someone comes along, like ourselves perhaps, who actually reads the story. That is the empirical reader. So the implied reader is someone to whom the tale is addressed but never named. The empirical reader who is the person who actually listens to it or reads it. And I'll say it's interesting for this reason. Think about the Brahms song. There, the narrator told us all about the youth and the maiden, but never seemed to address that particular song to a listener. And so, what Genette says about the way that the implied reader is there but never named, they effectively seem to be off to one side. And I find this very suggestive because of the way that an audience responds to music. It is off to one side. It is not there on the stage. If a concert hall is designed in a particular way, they may indeed be off to one side, left or right, along, say, the balconies. But if it was a Brahms song being performed inside a home as a kind of chamber music vocal recital, then yes, indeed, there might be people just sitting around in a very small group listening to perhaps an amateur singer accompanied by an amateur performer. So I think these points that Genette draws out towards the end are very interesting in themselves from a musical point of view. A performance art, in other words, can tell us plenty, but Genette is thinking about the literary form. However, music and of course drama can actualize it much more literally. So, just to remind you, question 9 should be a one-word answer, and all of these ideas flow from it. What is the name given to the recipient of a story? Okay, as before, if you can just keep your answers short, no need to reiterate the questions, just give answers, and really answers which are a single sentence will do plenty. That's absolutely fine. There's no need to answer at length. I just want to be sure that you understand and that you're able to follow the shape and the trajectory of what it is that Genette is saying. Okay, thanks, and I will indicate in the email that I send to provide these links where I'd like you to think about actually sending me something. So likely deadline, in other words, probably going to be the beginning of next week. I would think it's going to be something like Monday, so that'll be Monday the 30th of March. All right, I'll stop there again to prevent the video becoming too big, and we'll see each other again virtually, at least in a few days' time. Thanks. Bye.